What's the strategy on the Democrat side? On the one hand, you're giving President Trump a win on USMCA, I think it's fair to say. On the other hand, you're trying to impeach him.
There is this cliche in politics sometimes that people say that they can walk and chew bubble gum at the same time, and I think that's what the Democrats are trying to show that they're able to do here. On one hand, trying to hold the president accountable for what they see as behavior that is grounds for his impeachment and perhaps advocating for his removal, and on the other side, working with the administration on a trade deal that Democrats and I think the administration seem to like. And I think there's an argument from some that the better course, if you're the opposition party, is just basically to not help the president with anything because you want to make the president look as ineffective as possible. On the other hand, I know there are a lot of Democrats who believe that they want their vulnerable House members to be able to have something to run on that's positive next year. And I think they believe that the USMCA is that. And so that's why you have this, again, it's kind of a strange morning. You have impeachment on one hand, so the ultimate disagreement about the president and between the president and the House. And then on the other hand, you have this big bipartisan deal on trade, which is typically a very divisive issue.
Yeah, as you say, it looked sort of strange on the surface, but I wonder if it makes sense if you look at it through two different prisms. One, the election of the House, that's USMCA. We want to make sure we hold on to that if we're a Democrat. The other is who gets to be president. It might be two very different answers depending on which question you're asking.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And some of the most vulnerable Democratic House members, the ones that are basically going to be were responsible for winning the majority in 2018 and would help the Speaker maintain the majority in 2020. A number of those members, 31 of them actually, are in districts that Donald Trump won for president. Some of those districts are probably going to be pretty competitive for president next year. Some of them will not be. Some of those members are going to have a very difficult vote on impeachment. At the same time, some of those members also want to present something like the USMCA trade deal to their constituents and also rebut Republican attacks that they're just focused on impeachment and that they're just focused on negative things as opposed to positive governing. And again, I think there are a lot of reasonable disagreements as to which course the Democrats should proceed with here. It seems very clear that the Speaker, though, wants to both do impeachment or maybe feels obligated to do impeachment, but also wants to give her most vulnerable members something that they could present to voters next year.
We're talking with Kyle Kondik of Sabato's Crystal Ball. And Kyle, let's focus on the presidential election for a moment, because you have former Vice President Joe Biden, who went out well in advance, was up and then sort of stumbled a bit. Other people gained on him. There were questions about him. He's hanging in, and you have a piece out suggesting that reminds you of somebody who did this before.
Yeah, this race is starting to remind me some of the 2012 Republican race when Mitt Romney ended up leading for most of the time and winning the nomination kind of convincingly. And at various points throughout 2011, it was almost exactly 8 years ago today, Romney looked weak. He was surpassed at various points by candidates like Rick Perry and even Herman Cain and Newt Gingrich and Rick Santorum. But ultimately, Romney ended up triumphing because he had the right amount of appeal to the voters in the party who were most important, most notably voters who were not as ideologically extreme, voters who were maybe a little bit more moderate or only identifying as somewhat conservative. And I think there's some parallels with Biden in that Biden, like Romney, is kind of an establishment candidate. He's someone who is pretty well known in the party and pretty well respected. Biden also has the support of a very important and significant moderate voting bloc in the Democratic Party, and that is African-American voters who dominate the voting in many southern states and are an important part of the electorate in many others. And look for all of the predictions that Biden would fade at some point here, that he would fall behind. His national lead is still robust. While he's not doing that great in Iowa and New Hampshire, he is leading polls in Nevada and South Carolina. Those are races that, if he were to be able to win them, could set him up well for Super Tuesday, which follows very closely on the heels of South Carolina. So I don't think there's a really huge favorite in this race right now.
Right.
But I think I'd still probably rather be Biden than anyone else, and I probably would have said the same thing 6 months ago.
Right, final point. What about the money, though? There are reports that Joe Biden may be running somewhat short on cash. Where was Mitt Romney back in 2012? Did he have enough money? Because I don't remember Herman Cain as having a big war chest.
Romney not only was the best fundraiser in that field, although there were other decent fundraisers in that field too, but crucially, Romney also had a very powerful super PAC that ended up playing this kind of game of whack-a-mole against Newt Gingrich and Rick Santorum and other candidates in various states. Biden does not have as much money as some of his other competitors, although Biden also has a super PAC that's getting off the ground here. And for as unpopular as the idea of super PACs are amongst Democrats who tend to be more leery of outside money in politics and big money in politics, if Biden's super PAC can raise a fair amount of money, that would be an important weapon for him against other candidates who may be conventionally outraising him.
And Kyle, how much is that tied, the fundraising tied to how he does in Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina? At what point do people need to see him really showing up with some numbers in order to contribute to him?
Yeah, that's the challenge here, is that Biden is not as strong with white voters as he is with African-American voters. And, of course, Iowa and New Hampshire are very lily-white states. And so the danger for Biden is not only that he doesn't win Iowa or New Hampshire, but that someone else wins both of them, be it Pete Buttigieg or Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren. And then that person maybe establishes themselves as the chief opponent for Biden. And, oh, by the way, to your point, Biden could also look weak to not just the voters, but also to donors. And there's always the potential that money can dry up. You know, money can be a driving factor for a lot of these candidates. And Kamala Harris just got out. Right. I think the fact that her fundraising seemed to be drying up was a big part of that. So that's always the danger. But look, I think that overall, I think Biden is still holding up decently well here despite all of his problems.
Okay, Kyle, always a pleasure to have you on. That's Kyle Kondik of Sabato's Crystal Ball. I want to remind you that Michael Bloomberg is the founder and LP, the parent company of Bloomberg News.